Brighton and Hove Albion are a model of how a good football club should be run. They punch above their weight, they unearth excellent players, and they play watchable football. Who doesn't admire Brighton? But of course, that hasn't always been the case. It's not so long ago that they were on the brink of disaster. On the last day of the 1997 football season, in the old Division 3, the fourth tier of English football, Brighton scrambled a second-half equaliser against Hereford. It was one of the most important goals in their history, as the point they took from that game saved them from being relegated into non-league football. And that doesn't even really describe how desperate their situation had become. Brighton weren't just on the verge of being relegated, they were also about to lose their home. 2 years before, in 1995, a local paper, the Argus, broke the story that the Goldstone Ground, Albion's home for almost a century, was to be sold and demolished as a means of combating the club's perilous financial situation and debts of between £4 and £6 million. Now, this was with two problems. The first was that the supporters hadn't been consulted prior to that sale. The second was that no alternative home had been arranged. A third aggregating factor was that the club's co-owners, Bill Archer and Greg Stanley, and its chief executive, the former Member of Parliament David Bellotti, were also accused of having removed a clause in the club's Articles of Association preventing shareholders from profiting from the sale of the club's assets in the event of it going out of business, and essentially extracting more money from the club than they had ever invested. The ownership claimed that to have been an oversight. Supporters disagreed, and after the Football Association's intervention, the clause was reinstated. However, it did little to quell the local mood, which had become outright mutinous. Writing in The Independent in 1996, ahead of a game against Fulham, journalist Greg Wood reported that 800 Brighton fans had marched through the city demanding the board's resignation. With Chairman Bill Archer no longer attending games, he also noted that during the Fulham match, David Bellotti, the CEO and Archer's proxy, had to be escorted from the ground for his own safety. They hate him, wrote Wood, and even more, they hate the man that he represents. The 96-97 season was full of protests. According to 442 magazine, they also took place outside Archer's chain of DIY stores and even in his home village in Lancashire, on the other side of the country. And the protests had the desired effect. Before the final game to ever take place at the Goldstone Ground, and a week before that critical draw in Hereford, a consortium led by Brighton fan Dick Knight, who'd made his money in the advertising industry, took control of the club from Archer and Stanley and became club chairman. Now, the short-term future of the club had been secured, and the point at Hereford prevented relegation, but Brighton was still hardly recognisable from the club they'd one day become, mainly because they still didn't have a home. A proposal to a ground share with Portsmouth never came to fruition, and the best option available was for Albion to play their home games for 2 seasons at Gillingham's Priestfield Stadium, 2 hours away. The team was nearly relegated again in 1998, finishing second bottom before climbing into Division 3's mid-table the year after. The third year would bring another move. In 1999, Brighton moved back to their home city, but to an athletic stadium with temporary seating that sat behind a running track. The Withdean would be home for more than 12 years. It wasn't spectator-friendly. There were few roofs, and rainy days meant wet fans, but it was a springboard of sorts. Brighton would win the third division, by then the rechristened League Two, in 2001, and achieve a second straight promotion the very next season. It wasn't smooth sailing. Albion would bounce between the second and third tier more than once over the next few years, but they had established a new level, and the biggest fight was still ongoing. The search for a permanent home dated back to the Goldstone Ground sale and demolition, but while the site upon which the future Amex Stadium would eventually be built was identified as early as 1999, the ground itself wouldn't be completed for 12 more years. And the first issue with that was planning permission, which developed into a back-and-forth squabble between various branches of national and local government, local councillors and objecting residents. Permission was finally granted in 2007, with construction beginning a little over a year later. But funding was another issue. The final cost of the new stadium would be close to £93 million. Enter Tony Bloom, a professional poker player who'd made his fortune by selling online gambling company Premier Bet. Crucially, Bloom was also a childhood fan of the club. His grandfather had once been its vice chairman, and in 2009, he invested £80 million in return for a 75% stake, providing the necessary funds to complete construction and succeeding Dick Knight as club chairman. Knight remains an enormously popular figure, and his role in the club's past was certainly not lost on Bloom. On completing his takeover, he said of Knight, who subsequently became a life president, that nobody should be in any doubt that he saved the club from almost certain extinction at a time when no one else was willing to come forward. In a way, the very first game the club played at the new Amex Stadium was indicative of their optimistic future. On the opening day of the 2011-12 championship season, and despite being a goal down to Doncaster Rovers, who'd been their final opponents at the Goldstone Ground all those years before, two Will Hoskins goals, the last of which came in the 8th minute of stoppage time, meant that their new home was christened with a dramatic win. According to Guardian columnist Paul Hayward, Bloom's plan for Brighton at the time of his investment was to win promotion within 5 to 10 years. It would take 8. After falling short in the playoffs in 2015-16, Brighton would finish second to Newcastle the following year, winning promotion to the Premier League for the first time in the competition's history and returning to English football's top flight for the first time since 1983. Promotion was pledged with a win over Wigan Athletic and was followed by not only a full-scale pitch invasion of the Amex, but also a parade through Brighton on an open-topped bus and in front of 100,000 supporters who turned out to watch